in this lesson, what I want to do is spend some time talking about the relationship between the British Empire and the Boers and Bantu peoples between 1857 and sort of 1880, 1890. We're going to firstly, we'll spend some time talking about relations with the Boers, the Afrikaner settlers, and we then, in the next lesson, in the next section, we'll spend some time looking at the Bantu peoples. Well, these both illustrate the sort of one of the areas of the specification where you have to explore the relationship and the relations with indigenous populations, and these are good case studies to use and good case studies to illustrate the examples for this time period. So let's begin by looking at the relationship between with the Boers, the Afrikaner settlers, and we're going to do so by looking at a basic timeline. So, British interest and British expansion in this region begins between sort of 1867 and 1877, most notably because of the discovery of diamonds. The discovery of diamonds near Kimberley in 1867 ignites a rush that attracts a lot of international attention, not just the British, but a lot of international attention. The response was that by 1871, the British annexed West Griqualand and then Griqualand in the east in 1874. Again, I'm butchering those pronunciations. I do apologise, but they're on screen there in case if you want to know how it's spelled. The idea here was to take these two territories, to annex both of them in 1871 and 1874. And then to integrate them into the territories of the Cape Colony. These annexations then highlight the tension and heighten the tension with the Boer peoples, who viewed the annexation of both of these regions as an infringement on their own sovereignty. We then get to 1877 itself, and we see that with, as we've noted in the previous lessons when we looked at Benjamin Disraeli, we get the annexation of Transvaal. Facing economic difficulties and external threats, the Transvaal Republic sought the British in assistance. In 1877, the British annexed Transvaal, citing stabilisation as the sort of reason, the rationale for why they did so. And again, this was met with resistance, which would lead to the outbreak of the First Boer War in 1880 to 1881. The First Boer War we've talked about already, but we'll just summarise it briefly here. Begins with a series of attacks launched by the Boers against the British garrisons that were sort of occupying the Transvaal, culminating in 1881 at the end with the Battle of Majuba Hill, which resulted in British forces suffering a significant and a humiliating defeat. The subsequent Convention of Pretoria recognises the autonomy of the Transvaal, though Britain retained controls over its foreign affairs and its foreign policy. If you want to know more about the treaty or the Treaty of Pretoria, the Pretoria Convention, should I say, the lesson on Gladstone's reluctant imperialism is a useful place to find more information on that. Finally then, the relations with the Bantu peoples begins also in around 1880 to 1881 when we look at the first conflict, the Basuto Gun War. And so we're talking about Basutoland, which is sort of modern-day Lesotho, which we see that the Cape Colony in this period, or in this geographic region as well, sought to disarm the Basotho people, leading to the First Basuto Gun War. The Basotho, under leaders such as Masofa and Leothrai, again I'm butchering these names, that again they're on the screen here, resisted British efforts to try and confiscate their firearms, resulting in the conflict, which ended with a Basotho victory. The war reinforces the status of Basotho land as a separate British colony. So we're seeing a bit of a conflict between these two groups. In a previous time period, this was in 1877, I believe, not 1887. So just bear that in mind. To sort of swap this timeline over, this was a mistake on my part. I do apologise. We have the Xhosa Wars. The Xhosa Wars, the Xhosa people in the Cape Colony resisted British encroachment on their lands, And in 1877, not 1887, just bear that in mind, okay, the British initiated the Hausa War to suppress these resistances and to expand colonial territories. The result was the displacement of many Hausa communities and the consolidation of the British in this land. So just as a basic overview here, this slide isn't very helpful because there's a couple of mistakes here. So in 1877 to 1878 you have the Hausa Wars, okay, not 1887. So the timeline should be swapped over. So the Basuto gun war takes place after this time period, in 1880 to 1881. But other than that, everything on here is correct. Just a mistake on my part. I do apologise. So really, as a sort of general conclusion that we have here, the interactions with the Boers and the Bantu peoples are good illustrations and good case studies that you can use to think about the relationship with indigenous peoples, because they are characterized by territorial expansion and also military confrontation.